Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Bible Ponder for this week. Now, this is the last main video in our series on major themes in the Bible. So far, we've covered things like exile and exodus, wilderness, covenant, and just the idea of water in the Bible. In this last video, I want to talk about the idea of Sabbath. And we're going to keep this pretty short, but end, I think, on a really, really good note. Next week, we'll have a real quick video that will wrap up sort of all of the themes together, tie a little bow around it, and then that week we'll have a Zoom discussion. So a week from today will be our Zoom discussion following the short wrap-up video. So please do join us for that one. And before that one, if you want to rewatch any of the previous videos, just go to the playlist Bible Ponder, either on Facebook or on YouTube, and you'll be able to find all of them there, and you can rewatch them as many times as you want. So for Sabbath, this is a really interesting one because obviously it's a very big deal in the New Testament for Jesus, and a lot of the conflicts that he has with the ruling Jews are about violations or non-violations of the Sabbath. But what really is it, and where does it come from? Well, the Sabbath comes from God. It's one of the few kind of laws that, all of the laws, I guess, in the Old Testament do come from God. But the Sabbath is something that mirrors what God does. So some of the laws are, things you do about crops or whatever, and things you tithe or things you sacrifice. But the Sabbath mirrors how God acts in creation. On the seventh day of creation, God rests. God doesn't do any work. God just takes the day. And so then later on, when the people of Israel are entering into covenant with God, one of the Ten Commandments is that you will keep the Sabbath day, and you will rest, and you will keep it holy. And it begins from there, and then over the course of the law of the Old Testament and through the different oral traditions and all the different laws throughout Judaism, you have lots of specifics of how to observe the Sabbath, how to keep it holy, like we're supposed to as God says in the Ten Commandments. But it goes also further out from there. The idea of Sabbath isn't just about the seventh day being a day of rest. And again, in different cultures and in different parts of the world, the kind of work week has been different in a different amount of days. And the 7-day work week might even go back to ancient Judaism. And it's sort of ubiquitous now in most of the world. But we don't really have that in all sorts of places. In fact, in ancient Rome, you would only have maybe one day off every 8 days for kids in school. But there was one day where just farmers would come to market and bring their things. But it wasn't really a day off. It was just a day where they weren't farming, they were selling. So the idea of having a day of rest is quite a novel thing, especially for the ancient world. But it goes beyond that. So you have the seventh day is the Sabbath day. And then you also have a Shemitah, which is on the seventh year. You are supposed to let the land rest. So it becomes a Sabbath for the land every seventh year, where there's different rules and regulations about how this would work, and you would just not work the land, or so you would only kind of take what the land gives you. And what we found is this is also really good for the land, as we found in modern agricultural techniques with crop rotations and things with the composition of the soil. Over farming the same things in the soil can damage the land. So the idea of a Sabbath rest for the land is important just for long-term sustainable farming. But then you also get in the Old Testament, which didn't last all of that long, is the year of Jubilee. And the year of Jubilee is either every 50th year or every 49th year. There's some debate about this. It's said to be after 7 cycles of 7 Shemitahs. So it could be on the 49th year or it could be on the 50th year, depending on how you read it. But the year of Jubilee isn't just about land, and Shemitah also isn't just about land. It's also about the canceling of debts, the freeing of slaves, and also the returning of property to the original owner. So it was almost treated like if you were nearing a year of Jubilee, say there were 3 years until the Jubilee year, you could sell your land for farming to someone, but they would only get it for those 3 years. And then in the year of Jubilee, it would revert to you. So if you wanted to sell a field to someone, if you were near the year of Jubilee, you would get less money for it. Because you could say, oh yeah, I'll sell it to you for the last couple of years, but then I get it back. But if it's just after Jubilee, then they're getting it, for 47 years or however many. But then it's also, about the releasing of debts and again, a sort of resetting. But then also about property returning only applies for when all of the tribes of Israel are living in the promised land. So once a few of the tribes began to get taken over and exiled, the year of Jubilee ended. So when Jesus comes in Luke 4 says that he is announcing Jubilee, recovery of sight for the blind and good news for the poor and all of that sort of thing. It is a really big idea of renewal for the Jewish people. So we get this idea that Sabbath rest, whether on the 7th day, 7th year, or 7 cycles of 7 years, isn't just about not doing work or just about ceasing movement. It's about rest and restoration and kind of setting the world back to a position of original rest and peace where things are back kind of at square one. And I think it's a beautiful thing that's in conversation with the idea of shalom or peace, which isn't just, again, about a ceasefire, but shalom as peace is something much deeper, something much richer, something that goes so far beyond what we would think of as a sort of peace treaty, but it is deep in full reconciliation and peace with God and with the earth and with human beings. And so the idea of Sabbath rest and peace and shalom are kind of tied in together. But there's an idea then that we get from Jesus and then from later on in the New Testament that I'll get into here in a second about how we can achieve some sort of Sabbath here on earth and we can achieve some sort of shalom here on earth. But ultimately the full Sabbath and the full shalom are waiting for us when God remakes this whole world, and at the end of things, in the end of this age, when this world comes to an end and a new world greets us, that's when we will find that. So for Jesus, when he comes along and he is challenged about the Sabbath laws, often what he is challenging is this idea that the Sabbath is just about ceasing movement, or it's just about following little specific things. And so Jesus' line, humans were not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath for humans, is really about how the idea of Sabbath rest and how God rested is good for us, but it's not that we were made in order to follow these laws and in order to take the 7th day and the 7th year and all of that sort of thing. But that Sabbath is good for us, but we need to remember what it's for. It's for rest, it's for restoration. And it's not just about how much you lift or how many steps you walk. It is about a full, deep restoration and seeking after shalom. And that's what he wants to remind people of when he has conflicts about the Sabbath, is that it's more than just a ritualistic taking the 7th day off. It is deep and good for us. So the verses I want to read for us now come from Hebrews chapter 4. And Hebrews is an interesting book that we don't often get into much in our churches. It's very filled with a lot of Jewish imagery. We don't know for sure who the author of the book is, but is probably someone who, if not was Jewish, was very, very familiar to Judaism or was a convert. And the book of Hebrews is really steeped in kind of allusions to the Jewish faith, and there's a lot of talk about high priesthood and angels and ancestors and Jewish history and faith. And so in Hebrews chapter 4, we get an interesting look and an interesting theological projection of what we're talking about with a full Sabbath rest. So we'll give us a bit of a run-up through the argument that the writer of Hebrews is making. So through the end of chapter 3, the writer quotes a few verses of the Old Testament, speaking about how there was a Sabbath rest that was awaiting the people of Israel in the promised land when they were being brought out of Egypt by God. But that those who were rebellious, those who sinned and were not allowed to enter the promised land, they were not given that rest. So God was angry that they disobeyed, and for that reason they wandered the wilderness, and then they weren't able to enter that rest. And so the writer of Hebrews then makes an argument exhorting the readers to not be rebellious, to not disobey God, in order that we can enter that rest. And so this is what the writer says beginning in chapter 4, after quoting those things and talking about the people of Israel having disobeyed. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest is still open, let us take care that none of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For indeed the good news came to us just as to them. But the message they heard did not benefit them, because they were not united by faith with those who listened. For we who have believed entered that rest. Just as God has said, "As in my anger I swore, they shall not enter my rest," though his works were finished at the foundation of the world. For in one place it speaks about the seventh day as follows: "And God rested on the seventh day from all his works." And again in this place it says, "They shall not enter my rest." Since therefore it remains open for some to enter it, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience. Again he sets a certain day, today, saying through David much later in the words already quoted, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts." For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not speak later about another day. So then a Sabbath rest still remains for the people of God. For those who enter God's rest also cease from their labors as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one may fall through such a disobedience as theirs. So what the writer is alluding to here and saying is that there was a time formerly, and whether this could have ever actually been actualized, but there was an idea that there was rest awaiting the people of Israel in the promised land, but because of their disobedience, they weren't able to enter it. And that kind of echoes again, the Garden of Eden was full rest, but because of disobedience, that was lost. And so what the writer here is saying is that there is still a rest to come, a rest for us and a rest for the people of God through Jesus. And so my exhortation to us that comes from the writer of Hebrews is to keep our eye on that goal and look forward to that rest. It is a beautiful idea to think about at the end of our days, or at the end of this age, that we will enter into a full rest with God. There's a line that I use in the funerals that I do that I actually have borrowed from my wife's old minister, and something he used to say at funerals. And what I say, and I direct this to the person whose funeral it is, not, funerals are often both about the person who has passed away, but also to those who are still living. But this I direct to the person who has passed away. And I say, lay down your bones and rest in the love of God. And aside from being something that is beautiful and comforting, there is something specific that I mean in that being able to finally end our labors and enter into God's rest is something beautiful, to find that full Sabbath in God. And that's something that I look forward to, and that's something I hope that you look forward to as well, whether God comes to take us home before our days are done, or whether we come to the end of our days before we get to see that final day. Whatever it is, there is a rest that awaits us, a full rest that we haven't been able to see up to this point. And we mirror that a bit in the seventh day and on the Sabbath day when we do take our rest. But we will find that full rest in God one day. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of our Bible Ponder this evening. Remember, next week there will be a short wrap-up video, and then just after that we'll do a Zoom discussion, and we'll kind of go back and revisit some of these big themes, and maybe pull in some other themes if there are ones that come to your mind that you have questions about that I didn't cover. Bring those along and we'll chat about them as well then. So thanks for joining us. Have a good evening.